Roll call.
Jason Asbury,
Present.
David Beals,
Here.
Jim Dodger, Brian Brown.
All right. The meetings from our July 28th meeting are in the packet. If you'd like to review, I'll take a motion to approve, or if changes need to be made, let me know. I'll make a motion to approve.
The minutes?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
You were approving, correct, Brian? Brian, you were approving the minutes? We could. You were a little delayed. That's a little delayed, but you're good. Okay, this portion of our meeting is for citizens' concerns. If there's any citizens that have concerns that are outstanding of this subcommittee, please feel free to come forward, state your name, address.
Good evening. How are you gentlemen this evening?
Good, how are you?
My name is David Lowe. I'm a resident at 1055 Marina Drive, and that's a Hurricane address. I really expected to see a few more people here this evening. I didn't know I was going to be the lone dog here. But the reason I stepped up to the mic is that you asked if there are any citizen concerns. And I'm a citizen of the county, have been now for about 40 years. I previously lived in Charleston, and I've held a number of positions governmentally throughout my career. I'm retired now. I retired from being a construction general contractor. And the reason I'm here this evening is that in the last couple of months, or the last month and a half, back on July the 1st, let me back up, just on July 1st, there was a meeting in this room with the Board of Zoning Appeals that addressed one of the issues that evening for a gentleman by the name of Glenn Yeager II, who was seeking a variance and a special permit so that he could sell guns from his address where he had constructed a new building that had been previously owned and partially built by another builder by the name of William Thompson. Now, I go back many years with Bill Thompson. I've known him for 45 years. And I built in this county. I built in Kanawha County. I've built as far south as West Palm Beach, Florida, as far west as Cincinnati. And when the request for the variance came before the board, it raised a red flag to me because, first of all, I didn't want to have a gun shop right at my front door. Now, my property is positioned 75 feet from the property of Valley Outdoors, which is the subject property that was seeking the variance and special permit. Now, right next door to me, there's a preschool that's been in business for about 15 years that's located directly to the east of my front door. And directly straight across the street from me, door to door, is where Glenn Yeager lives. Now, that was the property that was originally built by Bill Thompson, that was originally permitted to be constructed as what was going to be known as the Colony West, which would have been a upper income, more luxurious condo style project. The first phase of the project included the residence that Bill was building. And I've reviewed all the files that are here at the county that relate to that project, as well as the files that relate to Valley Outdoors and how it came about. But when the project began, there was a very significant issue that was ongoing for almost 2 years before Bill Thompson could actually break ground to build the footers on the residence. And that was the fact that my property is located directly south from what was then a 1.71 acre tract of land, which was going to have the residence. And originally, according to Bill and his papers that he filed with the county, he had built this home for his daughter and her family, and he was going to put in a tennis court. Something happened there. Who knows how things occur, but we all have families. We know everybody has a change of mind. And that property was not developed as it had originally been intended. There was a change that was made to then convert what had been partially done. Bill apparently moved ahead with construction even prior to getting his full permit. He did a lot of site work. And I've known Bill, like I said, for such a long time that, I even talked with him while he was making progress with it. But he reached a point where he got the house finished, he moved in, and then he began the construction of what was going to be an 8-unit apartment complex or condo complex, which was going to be given the name the Colony West. Now, the permit that he got was number 10377. And that's important to understand because the county, as you all well know, they issue permits based on numerical numbers. Now, Bill started having some health problems. Other situations took place where he claims that he had the property sold. His investor backed out of the second deal that he was working out. So he couldn't finish it. And then he fell into ill health. Now, if any of you have ever traveled over towards the Mount Vernon Road, Marina Drive area where this property is located, where Valley Outdoors now exists, the lower basement area, the garage, the floors, all the concrete, and the residence were completed. Very fine work. But then when it got to the second floor, that's when Bill began to have a lot of health problems. And I talked to him regularly because I used to go check on him because he was a neighbor. And he was having difficulty walking and getting around. So he never got to finish the project that he originally intended, which then changed to be an 8-unit complex. That 8-unit complex, what happened, they got the second floor on, which was actually the first floor deck, and then the outside walls. And then it sat for a couple of years, and then it collapsed within itself after we had a really bad storm here a year and a half ago. If you remember, we had a lot of wind, a lot of people lost their roofs, and you saw roofers all over town doing roof jobs. And it was during that occasion that those walls collapsed. And then it sat there for a while. Then Bill sold it. And he sold it. He sold it to Glenn Yeager. And Mr. Yeager did a beautiful job of remodeling First, he had to demolish what was deteriorated, which included all the outside walls of the what is now the structure of Valley Outdoors. Then he had to take off the floor deck. He left the floor frame in place, the floor trusses. He redecked it, and he built it up, put it under the roof, finished it off. And I'm sure that the inside is as nice as the outside. I was really quite happy to see the project getting completed, but my understanding was that there might be a real estate office go in there, which I thought would be nice, nice, quiet business. And then, I'm a terminal cancer patient, and I'm blind in my right eye. I have glaucoma, I have cataract, and it's hard for me to read. And so I don't spend a lot of time scouring the newspapers. To observe everything that was in the files here took me days to complete because I have to read with a magnifying glass. But to make you understand, my concern here is that I didn't realize, and I don't think anybody in the community knew, because there were never any documents filed to indicate what the intended use was. What happened was that when Mr. Yeager purchased the property, for some reason, which I cannot quite understand, because I'm a professional builder, retired. I built for 45 years. And not just small projects, I did projects in the millions of dollars. Mr. Yeager was allowed to assume the permit that Mr. Thompson applied for, which was to include the residence and what later became an 8-unit complex. The permit was issued under the name of the Colony West, number 10377 was the permit number. Now, never in my entire life as a builder, and I've been the director of housing for the city of Charleston, and I worked with many builders in the Charleston area. It's not a whole lot different than Putnam County. But never in my entire life, in my entire career, was I ever allowed, or have I ever seen another builder assume a previous builder's permit and then to proceed to build what that permit called for, and then not build what that permit called for, because the permit that was issued to Mr. Thompson was specifically stated, I think it was the second condition in there. They had 18 or 23 conditions to the permit. And I'm sure you all have copies of this that you've seen. The second condition of it was that, actually the first condition was that the builder had to comply with all regulations and ordinances that were current of that day at the time of issuance of the permit. Now, the ordinance that you all are going to be discussing this evening is related to Article 600, 650, and 1700.17, all of which I'm very familiar with. When Mr. Yeager assumed that permit, which was allowed to be done by the Office of Planning and Infrastructure, I don't understand why that occurred, because it's highly irregular. That permit also, second condition was on it, was that it had to be built exactly as it was permitted for a residence and an 8-unit complex. So in my review of the files, I looked for another permit that would have been issued to Mr. Yeager. And one other thing was that property was all one separate parcel of land. at the time that the original permit was issued. After it was purchased by Mr. Yeager, that property was split in half. So it became two separate parcels. So even if it had been not irregular to assume a permit from another builder, that parcel of land was split. A separate permit would have been required regardless for the construction of the existing building where Valley Outdoors exists. Now,
Mr.
in their,
Miller, in the interest of time, I'm going to give you about another 2 minutes.
well, I'm trying to state this information because I want it to be a matter of public record. Because so far, I've been to many of these meetings, and none of this information has been discussed. And I tried to read it the last time I was before the BZA, and I was gaffled down and could not speak after everybody else in the room spoke. So I appreciate your understanding. I realize it takes a few minutes for me to tell you why I'm concerned about what's going on. Right now, Mr. Yeager has filed civil action against the county because he was issued a no-go on his request. He began selling guns 2 weeks before his permit even got to the point where he requested the waiver. That was on July the 1st. He began selling guns on the 20th of June, Father's Day. And I have advertising that shows that. He was breaking the law then. After he was denied his request here before the BZA on July the 1st, he turned right around the next day and began selling guns anyway, regardless of the fact that he had been denied the permit to do so. He then received a notice from the Planning and Infrastructure Office to cease and desist, and he didn't. He then filed a suit against the county, the Planning Commission, the Building Commission, BZA, and essentially himself, because he is a member of the Planning Board. So it's highly irregular the way things have gone. Now he's selling guns because he's been given approval by a judge's order to temporarily conduct his business. And I'm aware of all this. I've read all these documents. Now, I know you all can't affect that. However, the reason I'm here this evening, and I'm the only person here, I thought there might be a few people here. I'm concerned that this gentleman, Mr. Yeager, who I have nothing against other than the fact that he's selling guns illegally. Now, he is doing it under a court order that allows him to do it, but he's still doing it. There's a school right next door. Been in business 15 years. And you know, you're at the age where you're probably still young enough, you have young children. I don't know if you do or not, but the rest of us are kind of gray-headed here. So I'm assuming that maybe you have some younger children or maybe some grandchildren that might even take refuge in that place through the day when mom and dad are gone. All I know is that by Mr. Yeager being able to sell guns, it doesn't necessarily endanger our region and our area, although it isn't legal for him to do that right now, even though he's been given the okay to proceed. I can, as a community member, I can disagree with the judge's decision, and I fully disagree with him. But my concern here is that I know there was a change in the text of the Articles 600, 650, and 1700 that occurred back in January. What concerns me is if that text change included an exemption of the 300-foot rule. And being that within 300 feet, you can't sell guns within 300 feet of a residence, a church, or a school. And he is in violation of that. No matter how anybody wants to look at it, he is in violation of it morally and ethically. Maybe not by Judge Stowers' opinion until he makes a final decision, but it's still illegal. So my concern here is to raise your attention to the facts that I've brought to you, realizing that I'm not the only one in our community that is concerned about having a gun shop right in our front doors. I circulated a petition that I gave to the BZA and to the planning office on June the 30th that had names of roughly about 17 or 18 people. It was almost everybody that was a resident within the 300-foot area. I think I missed 2 people because they might have been out of town. And the businesses out at Burger King and the strip mall area, they really could probably care less because they're corporate, okay? So if you gentlemen would, I would appreciate if you could understand the feelings of the regular citizen that lives in that area who does not want to have guns right in their front door. When you discuss the interpretation of these laws that I just mentioned, if you would, please keep that in mind because, put yourself as a resident at 1055 Marina Drive instead of where you live, and you might feel that way. Okay?
Certainly appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Very well. Thank you. I unplugged this one earlier, Larry. Same reason.
I had a couple of questions about, just for clarification, because I wasn't, about that situation. Maybe you guys can answer, someone can answer. So I assume it says Judge Stowers has entered an order allowing him to do it while that litigation is pending. And then the BZA, I guess I'm unfamiliar with what happened there. So I'm assuming he went before the BZA asking for a special use permit under Article 1700, which would have been basically retail sales, pawn shop or firearms out of that location, and that got denied. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. There were 2 things that he asked for. One was a variance
Yeah.
for the requirement of not less than 300 feet from a church, school, or residence.
Okay.
And then there was the second one for a spatial permit. The BZA addressed the issue of the variance, denied it, and did not reach.
Didn't feel like they had to. Okay. Yeah.
As a result of the variance being denied, they did not really address the spatial permit.
Larry, sorry, go ahead.
So they denied his request to allow the variance for the 300 feet from a church, school, or residential building, and they were done at that point. And that's when he filed the lawsuit? Okay.
Hey, Larry, is the 300 feet just tied because it's considered a pawn shop, or is that tied specifically to firearms regardless? Or do we have clarification on that?
It is in, the way it's listed in the ordinance, it refers to Article 1700.
The Q under 1700? Sale of firearms and/or the loaning of money on the security of personal property.
It's listed as retail sales, pawn shop, firearms. It says slash between. A retail sale, slash pawn shop, slash firearm shall be located no closer than 300 feet from a church, school, or residential building. That's in, it is due.
So, I mean, we might as well go ahead. I mean, this is first item of business, is this clarification. My question would be, and I think we somewhat discussed this. Actually, let me back up. Mr. Lowe, just to let you know, this body currently before you, all we can do as a body here is make recommendations. And I just want to let you know, and that's obviously then goes to the Planning Commission and then ultimately to the County Commission. So how would a Dunham's or a Dick's or a Cabela's, anything like that, would that fall under Q? Or I think that's Dick's, Dunham's, Cabela's, because I think that's where the clarification is the way I understand this first bullet point items. And I think that's not knowing the full background or thinking for Mr. Yeager, but I think that's Mr. Yeager's approach too, is that he's a retail sales. He's not a pawn shop. So he's, in his eyes, he thinks he's probably no different than Dick's, Cabela's, Dunham. So how does our ordinance define that particular business? Would that fall under Q?
Well, that's part of the reason for clarification,
Okay.
potentially.
It is strange. I mean, I gotta tell you, if you're gonna talk about pawn shops and firearm sales, why put retail sales in front of that? Because retail sales is separated out. I mean, that encompasses anything. So I think retail, then, sorry, you can't be within 300 feet of a retail residential building, church or
Can't sell
school.
that drink 300
Right.
feet from a
Yeah,
church.
yeah. Because if you look back at Article 600, is it, I think, might be 650. No, it go to 600, and under the permitted principal uses, under NN is retail business limited to 20,000 square feet. And then if you go over to 650, which is a high density, that's retail businesses over 20,000 square feet. So you've already got retail businesses included in there addressed. Why do you need to address it? Why put retail sales? You know, that just adds to the confusion. If their intended purpose of 1700 point whatever Q was to address pawn shops and firearm retail sales, then that's what they should have said.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one thing I would make a motion on eventually is to simply strike retail sales from Q. And then to me, there's two more issues, or one more issue, and that's the combination of pawn shop and or firearms.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think pawn shops and I'm a gun owner and have a concealed carry permit myself and
Same.
firmly believe in the Second Amendment. I believe that pawn shops and firearms probably do deserve a little bit more attention when it comes to their location with respect to churches, schools, and residential housing. That's just me. But I don't think there's any purpose to be served by having retail sales.
It doesn't pass a common sense test.
Yeah.
And it doesn't pass a common sense test for retail sales to be included with the other two items, if pawn shops and firearms are inclusive or exclusive.
Yeah, it makes
of each
it
other.
more vague and makes it subject to a challenge. I think the more vague you are, the more you are subject to a legal challenge.
Yeah, because under that, if I'm selling clothing, apparel, and guns, am I a retail store?
Yeah.
How am I any different again than Dick's or any other Walmart? So I'll make a motion to strike retail sales from section Q of Article 1700.
Can we, and would you accept the amendment to your motion,
Yes.
which I'll second if you do, put pawn shop / firearms sales? Because it just says firearms, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
I'll second your motion. So Q would then read just pawn shops / firearm sales.
hang on.
Go ahead, Lee.
Article 150, 600, and 650.
Yeah, correct.
Do we need, I don't have an issue with that motion. What I want to make sure of,
Let's make sense of item
Firearm.
number 1 under Q. It says, "The sale
Yes.
of firearms and/or the loaning of money on the security of personal property pledged in keeping shall not be permitted uses separate from the sale of other retail goods within a C1 or C2 zoning district." So striking retail sales doesn't really impact that, but is that item in there attempting to keep section 700, the retail, from being a pawn shop? Is that the intent? I mean, I'm just trying to make sense of that as well.
I'm not sure, I don't understand your question.
I'm just trying to make sense of what number 1 actually means. What's the intent of that? Shall not be permitted uses separate from the sale of other retail goods within
Oh.
C1 or C2 zoning district.
It looks like you're not allowed to do it by itself in C1 and C2. You can sell, like you can do a Dick's, but you can't just do a Joe's firearm sales in C1 or C2. Or you can do a pawn shop if you want to tie that to a jewelry store or something, make that part of that business. It looks like that's what that says.
So no standalone,
Separate
right?
from the sale of other retail goods. Yeah, you can't get it can't be a permitted use separate from the sale of other retail goods.
And we're number 2 under
Yeah, it covers, that basically just covers what Jim just said. So, yeah.
Yeah, pawn shops incorporate the sale of other retail goods. I'm trying to think, a friend of mine had a pawn shop in East Huntington on Route 60. And he not only had a pawn shop, he had retail sales of other goods in there as well. So I'm assuming that business would be authorized in C1 or C2. But if someone just wanted to open up a straight-up pawn shop by itself, you couldn't do that in C1 or C2.
are we covered if you go and look at a retail structure, a retail permitted use that's under 600 and 650? Does there need to be clarification? If, for lack of a better analogy or example, use Valley Outdoors. Valley Outdoors doesn't scream guns. It's an outdoor retail space. So under this line of thinking, is that exempt from falling under Q?
It wouldn't, it would only be exempt in that it would be allowed. Because like if you sell canoes or outdoor gear and firearms, then I think you're okay under number 1. But you couldn't locate it unless you got a variance within 300 feet from a church, school, or residential. So you still can't get around that
Okay.
unless you get a variance. So Dick's couldn't come in, or what's it called, outdoor?
Valley Outdoors. There's the.
Or whatever.
Dunham's or
Dunham's,
Yeah,
Cabela's.
if we were going, if Cabela's couldn't come in and locate, although they could because they're not a single use, they could not come in and put it right next to a school, a church, or a residential structure. Unless they got a variance.
Larry, you're the one that has to deal and interpret whatever we end up going with. How's this help or hurt, or I'd like to get your thoughts on it.
One of the other things on this, and I think one of the arguments, certain board is that the way they're reading this, it has to be, as it currently stands, retail sales and a pawn shop and a firearm shop. So they're interpreting the selections as ands,
So,
And item one doesn't, helps there, actually, in my opinion, item one helps that case, because there is slash and, or and slash,
And/or?
yeah, and or.
So from a legal perspective, if we cross out the retail sales, 'cause I think we've all come to a consensus that does not make sense to be included in Q, and I'm obviously not an attorney, but the slashes versus a comma in a legal world, is there any difference?
who's arguing that those slashes are
That-
hands?
That's Mr.
Yeah,
Yeager's
Yeager's
argument.
argument.
That was, I think, was that the basis for the temporary order? Judges
So he's
decided
saying that for
way?
Q to even apply, that you have to have all three? And so that
Yeah,
since he
he's
doesn't
not-
have all
He's not
three,
a pawn shop, so therefore he just falls under retail, the way he's looking at it,
give me a break.
he falls under retail
That
sales.
does not seem like a reasonable argument. I know, but, and I get it that Judge Stowers has entered an order that allows him, he's trying to maintain the status quo while this thing's going on. Although, I got a problem with him going out there and doing it after the BCA told him not to. It's not really maintaining the status quo. Now, if you've been doing it for a couple of years, then I can see Judge Stowers entering an order saying, okay, we're gonna leave this thing the way it is now until we hash this out. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
I will say that, from my perspective, I'm not going to fight one way or the other on the 300 feet. Where I look at it, me personally, if you put a gun shop at the end of my street, I'd be the happiest camper because I could be down there every weekend. So I'm not going to, I don't personally have an issue with a retail store selling firearms 300 feet from a church, school, or residential building due to the fact that they're federally licensed. You got to run through the ATF, yada, yada, yada. That's my personal opinion. I'm not going to, that's not going to hang me up one way or the other how we want to decide
Yeah.
on this.
No, I hear you, and I'm actually kind of in your camp because of the
And I don't have
security and
kids,
everything.
so-
And actually, it'd probably be safer to have a firearms business near your house than a lot of other
I've
businesses.
got a great spot in my neighborhood, Mr. Yeager. I'd love for him to put his thing there. I'd be a champion for it.
That being said, it looks like they were, the folks who have come before us had an issue with, and I can see some folks not wanting, definitely a pawn shop, possibly even a firearms sales shop, because they might argue the people that it draws or attracts or whatever aren't those folks that you want close to a school, a church, residential area.
I have a harder time with if it's a Dick's or whatever. But I don't want to recreate the wheel either. Larry, go ahead.
You know what? If we want to address that, I think, number one, for the record, I would say that if we want to address that argument that those slashes mean ands, I think we can fix that pretty easily.
Strike them out and put a
Or just put comment, like no retail sales business, comma, no pawn shop, comma, nor any firearms business shall be located. That kind of thing. So we can make it really, really clear. But on the record, state, because I don't want to give anyone on either side any wiggle room on what we're doing here affecting them. We can say, look, we think it's clear now, but out of an abundance of caution, we're going to go in and make it really, really rock solid. We can do something like that if that's the will of the committee.
I will support that from where I'm at.
So are we removing the retail sales though, right?
Yeah,
We're
I
gonna
think
remove it,
that's,
I
Q
think-
would just be specific to pawn shops,
And firearm,
Yeah.
sale of firearms.
firearm sales.
Firearm sales.
yeah, and I would recommend that Q reads pawn shops, And I don't even think we need to
let
put
me-
slash here. I just put pawn shops and
Comma,
firearms
yeah.
sales.
The one up above it says restaurants and fast food
yeah.
restaurants, so it should just be.
And,
Pawn shop and firearm sales.
yeah,
Let me ask you, is it worth entertaining the 300 feet clause on church, school, and residential buildings and adding that under 650 and 600 and specifically tie that to commercial retail spaces selling firearms to further clarify?
well, except it does reference you back there to it, Article 1700.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
In both 600 and 650. And we're going to need to delete retail sales from that one too. That's under LL on 650. So we'll be deleting retail sales and changing that to pawn shops and firearms sales. And under 600,
It's in 600.04, special permitted use. So you would just strike out retail sales, it would just be pawn shops and firearm sales.
which one is it?
600.04.
Yeah.
Where it references back to 1700, but I don't think that addresses Jason's concern where
Yeah, my question is, should there be more clarification or better
you
definition?
probably just
of-
needed to
define-
define firearm sales,
Yes.
right?
What, you need, we need to do something else here?
That's my question.
Or I just say pawn shops and firearm sales as defined in Article 1700?
Yeah, I think it's pawn shops and firearm sales, see Article 1700.
Yeah, I agree with that.
As defined in 1700?
Or just see Article 1700, that's what it, I mean, I don't think you need to change that, that's referencing back to the article, and
Yeah, and I mean, if you wanted to add a form, you could define firearm sales. Because it's firearm sales, strictly like gun shop.
so here, the question I think that Jason's asking, would not that a Dick's would move in there, just because it doesn't make any sense, or a Cabela's, but they could not do that because section 1700 would be within the 300 feet. Right? It covers the bases.
I'm just trying to make sure we go.
Yeah, and I would recommend that we change one under Q in 1700. Again, to make it more clear, there's no reason to have and or under number one. I think we just change it to or.
Yeah.
Sale of firearms or the loaning of money, blah, 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 shall not be permitted use as separate from the sale of other retail goods. I mean, that just, you don't need and or.
I think it applies to the pawn shops though, right? I mean, because the sale of firearms, Valley Outdoors is one thing, or Cabela's is one thing. They're not taking cash on loan, or they're not taking your gun on loan to give you cash out. That's what pawn shops do.
Yeah, the loaning of money on on security personal property pledged is separate from the sale of firearms.
Okay.
They're saying either one.
Yeah, I got you, because a sale is defined as something
Yeah.
separate. Yep.
But then they come back there saying pawn shops that incorporate the sale of other retail goods, which is really just another way of saying what they just said in number one, making it clear. If you want to, we can expand that to firearms sales too. Firearms, pawn shops, or firearms sales businesses which incorporate the sale of other retail goods are permitted, if you all want that. That would make the Dick's or the Cabela's okay. Which is really what number one does, but for some reason they put in
Yeah,
number
number
two.
two is really not applicable, because it's covered under the sale of other retail goods directly above it.
Yeah.
And they're
Right.
really just restating.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just another way of saying what they just said, but they limited in number two to pawn shops only. And then, while you're thinking about that, and then I would go ahead and recommend we clear up number three the way I mentioned it before.
Yes.
And I would just say, no pawn shop or firearms sales business shall be located any closer than 300 feet from a church, school, or residential building.
Yep. You want to redo and make, I'll rescind my motion if you want to make a new motion, Jim.
You want me to make it?
Yeah, you make it. You've written this one better than I did.
Well, before I do that, though, what do you all want to do about 2? Do you want to leave it in there and add firearms to it? You want to take it out completely?
I think you just take it out.
You just take it out. I would agree.
Okay, so this will be the motion. Under Article 1700, is that 1700? Second.
Page 170Q.
1700.17 Q. I would move that we change the caption of that to read pawn shops and firearm sales.
And.
And and then I would also move to amend number 1 to delete in that first line and slash, so it just reads or. And then delete number 2 in its entirety. And number 3 would read, no pawn shop or firearms sales business shall be located closer than 300 feet from a church, school, or residential building. You don't even need any. And number 3 would read, no pawn shop or firearms sales business shall be located closer than 300 feet from a church, school, or residential building. And then to bring 600 and 650 into compliance with all that, or so that they read the same, I would also move that Article 600.04Q be changed to read pawn shops and firearm sales as defined in Article 1700. And the same thing with respect to Article 650.02 LL, have it read the same way, pawn shops and firearm sales as defined in Article 17.
I'll second that motion.
Motion, have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Brian, are you still with us?
We lose him.
I'd have hung up on us a long time.
We just made a motion to amend Section 1700 in various forms. I'm not sure if you heard the motion, but we did make a motion to change it, and we called for a yes vote. So we did request for a vote. It was seconded.
Okay. Motion carries 4-0.
Just for, I don't know, Larry, are you recording? You're kind of doing the minutes? I would ask the minutes specifically reflect that while we feel the current ordinance is abundantly clear, just try to make it, if it's possible, even more clear. That's why we're doing this, so that we feel that the slashes in the argument that is being made that you have to have all three businesses before that ordinance applies to you is not a sound legal argument. But nevertheless, we're going to go ahead and make it clear.
Larry, are you good for us to move on to item 2?
Yeah, these are,
Yeah, the 24-month.
these are amendments that have been suggested earlier to the improvement application permit order, which is basically the permit ordinance. One of the things that was suggested was that the residential construction has to be completed within 24 months of the permit issuance. Otherwise, you have to pay a new permit fee and the amount of the fee. Those are questions basically that I have. If you will look at the ILP, which is
Article 200.
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's Article 200. And I gave you a summary sheet,
Yeah.
and I added the first page in red. I added that in there. The only thing I want to point out to you, I mean, that was what was discussed. Article 100.04, if it is a subdivision regulation, these are the subdivision regulations. Depending on the number of lots that are in the subdivision, the effective date of the preliminary plat approval can be up to 8 years. If you have a building permit that is issued, and generally that 8 years, or whether it's 5, 6, or 8 years, depending on the number of lots, that is for the infrastructure to be put in, roads, water line, sewer, that kind of stuff. So they have 8 years to do that. If they get a building permit at or near the beginning of the process, they probably are not going to complete it within 24 months because they will have roads.
I see.
Those kind of things in. I don't know that we need to address it. I just wanted to bring it to your attention that there seems to be a little bit of inconsistency there.
So would a builder or developer actually get a building permit before they have the infrastructure in place?
We've got one going on right now.
Really?
Yes.
That doesn't make much sense. Me, anyway. I mean, why would you start the clock on your building permit if you don't even have your infrastructure?
Like I said, we've got one going on right now.
Is that a single residential build, or is that a major subdivision?
Major subdivision.
And they got the building permit too.
Now, is their building permit for all the lots or individual for one house?
So again, I don't know that we can fix that. I just want to bring it to your attention that there is a little bit of inconsistency there that they,
Yeah, when we talked about this in the other room down there, when those notes were lost, this was not brought to our attention. And you weren't here then to bring it to our attention.
And Larry, you may not be able to answer this, but do you think the builder felt that he had to pull a building permit in order to start the grading and the infrastructure? Or, I mean, I don't understand the need to go ahead and pull the building permit if you weren't going to start construction of the house. Unless we're requiring it. I guess that's my question. So, I mean, we don't require a builder to pull a building permit to put in roads or utilities, I guess is okay. That's my question.
You have the option of doing that, though. If you're doing a major subdivision, you can do it in phases, and you get sell that lot in advance in order to help
Mark.
finance the rest of the
Right.
construction.
Should we consider maybe putting an exception in there? I mean, number one, if we want the 24-month thing to be in there. If we didn't do it at all, we wouldn't have to worry about it. But if we want the 24 months in there, we want it to apply generally, can we put an exception in there? Should we put an exception there? It says something like, unless it's part of a major subdivision application, in which case the construction shall be completed within 24 months after the infrastructure is in place or something like that? I mean, I don't,
Can you not do something similar to what we just did in 1700, where you say, see this section, and then you have it defined a little bit further?
Yeah,
As I think you're stating, Jim, where it kind of refers back to major subdivisions in this section.
Is the easiest change is your 24-month, and we may have discussed this in the meeting that notes were lost, that the 24-month time period doesn't start at the time the building permit was issued, but that 24-month starts at the time
they
that
start.
they start breaking ground
See,
on that I think that's what we discussed.
Yeah, see, I think you're right. There was some
How do you
discussion
determine
about
that,
it.
though? I mean, who's going out there to
Well-
spot check that on that date? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
Right, I mean, they're not.
We did talk
We
about that
did,
because we
'cause-
talked about different lengths, like if you're not going to do that from breaking ground, then it's going to be longer and shorter if you're going to do it from the time they actually start construction. What was there was only one incident really, as I recall, there was one incident that was brought to our attention that was the impetus behind this. Somebody got a building permit and then just didn't start on it for a long time or something.
but are we comparing apples to apples here? Because residential construction, that is after the infrastructure is, well, I would think, someone's not gonna put a house unless the infrastructure there. So the major subdivision, that is the time to get the infrastructure in place within 5, 6, and 8 years, right? Those are two completely separate pieces, pretty well defined, so I
Well,
don't
it-
think there's any overlap there, is there?
Yeah, and it talks about preliminary plat approval. That's the preliminary plat approval is for the 5, the 6, or the 8 years. I mean, maybe we should just tell them when they come in, look, you don't want to get your building permit right now unless you want to do it on that one lot. And the 24 months would apply to that because they're going to want to get it built so they can get their financing and everything. But other than that, say, look, we'll give you a building permit, but you really only need to get your preliminary plat approval to go in and do your infrastructure. Come back when you're ready to start building and get your building permits.
Yeah, because there's no, if you apply for 5 building permits, you get 20% discount.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should, go ahead, Larry, what were you going to say?
Unless they have, if they're starting new construction, we'll give them one permit period. So you get the one lot exemption. Unless they have subdivided it already, then you get additional. So if it is one lot, has it been subdivided into individual lots where homes are located, they'll get one permit.
So Allen Bell's subdivision, for example, they only have one permit, even though there's 3 or 4 foundations in the ground right now? Okay.
Yeah, because they've already started construction, okay. So basically, if I come in tomorrow and I've got a 13-acre tract of land that I'm ready to subdivide and start putting utilities in, I come in and I get my preliminary plat approval, I can start putting my utilities in.
You can. If you haven't subdivided, you're going to pay for each one of your subdivisions. Subdivide the lots.
Right,
To get that approved, you're going to pay out $750 a lot.
for the preliminary plat approval. Okay, so I've done that. I don't want to get my building permit yet for any of my lots, maybe the one to get financing, but if, whatever. So 6 months from now, I come back, I've got my utilities in place, and then I come in and get my building permits to start putting houses up. Okay. Maybe that's what we
But
just need.
we restrict builders to one building permit in a major subdivision at a time.
If it is a single lot, if you've got 5 acres, 10 acres, it's not subdivided, it will be one lot exemption.
I got you. But if it's subdivided, you can have
I think we ought to just discourage, and once this gets out there and gets known, we just discourage them from getting their building permits until they're ready to start putting up houses.
They'll learn. I mean, they're gonna have to learn. It's our job to educate them, plus if they, trip on the 24 months or why, I would make a recommendation that the fee be equal to the original permit fee. Just so it's clear cut, black and white, keep it simple.
So, we're gonna go ahead and go with the red.
Yeah. Yeah, the red was what was
Okay.
agreed to in a previous meeting to be added, correct? So the questions would be what you have at the bottom of page 2, under the non-residential construction project, right?
Yes, they're on the top of it there, which is residential, and they think non-residential, is basically the same issue.
Okay, yeah, so question 1, I am of the opinion it should be of the same original cost. And that takes out question 2, right? Because it's not the cost to complete, you don't have to determine what percentage of completion is. Question 3, how does an applicant file for a waiver of the new permit fee? How would they apply in the section blue above for that 1 year? It says a planning commission may grant a time extension of 1 year. The developer may request a maximum 2-year extension. One extension. How do they go about that? I would probably should just
I'll
process.
just come into the, I figure they would come into the office, maybe
Formal
Send a
application with
letter
the
or
Office of
something, yeah,
Planning
I mean-
and Infrastructure.
anything to get on the agenda of the planning commission.
Well, for these, if it is, it can be done in-house.
Yeah.
If it is, if they are compliant and everything else, they're just asking for an extension for, the weather's been bad. COVID's hit, we can grant that.
Material costs, right?
Yes, material costs. That can be granted in-house. So we can do that in planning office.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
The waiver, though, that is something that has to go to the planning commission.
Yeah.
Provided the new committee, they go like go to the planning commission.
You just automatically, if they say, I'd like to get that waived, you say, well, yeah, you'll be on the agenda for the planning commission, whatever day.
Yes, and this will be set in probably for a public hearing.
Yeah,
So we're gonna have to do an advertisement, 15-day notice, and there's gonna be, we're gonna have all the advertising costs.
do we need to advertise that? Or can we just put it on the agenda and it's a public meeting, make it an agenda item? Do we publish the agenda?
Yes.
I don't think unless it's, like there are other parts of the ordinance that do require the publications. I think that, if it doesn't require it, I think it's enough that they come in and say, I want a waiver. You put it on the agenda is made public, and then we just take it up at the meeting.
And that may work. Like I say, I'm just anticipating some of the questions we're gonna be getting.
Yeah,
Because if they are aware that they can get a potential waiver of it by 2/3 vote of the planning commission, they may show up at hearing, it won't be on the agenda, and you won't be able to vote on it.
but no, they have to be on the agenda. And you tell them, if they come in and they say, I'd like a waiver, you say, well, you'll have to come to the meeting, we'll put you on the agenda. If John Doe requests a waiver of the fee, and then it's on the agenda, we get to that item, he comes up and gives us his, and it's a public meeting, the agenda's published, so everybody, it's been publicly noticed. He comes up, or she comes up and says why they think they should get a waiver. We take a vote, And if it gets 2/3, it gets waived. If not, they don't get waived.
And that would work if they notify us. It won't work if they just show up to the meeting.
Well, they'll learn real quick, they'll have to come back to the next meeting.
Yeah, if they're not on the agenda, then they don't get, if they're not on the agenda, they don't have
Yeah,
time to plead their case. I think that's.
yeah.
You had two other questions. The applicant, how does the applicant file a waiver of the new permit fee? I think we've already addressed that, but then the fourth question is, if the applicant must file a waiver of the new permit fee, should we charge for a fee waiver application? So my question would be, how much is a residential and non-residential permit fee today? If they would have to pay that again, what's that cost? I'm not saying I'm in favor of charging them for a waiver. However, if, I don't want to leave money on the table.
I would only be in favor of charging for a waiver if we had to do what Larry initially suggested we might need to do, and that's do the formal publication in the newspaper once a week for 2 successive weeks or whatever it is. I don't think we need to do that. Because we're not talking about like making a change to a piece of property, a zoning ordinance or anything like that. We're talking about a fee waiver. So it's not going to cost us anything. If we don't, since we're not having to incur any more costs, I don't think we need to charge them. But they
Yeah,
come in there basically saying, look, I don't want to have, I need an extension. I know the thing says I need to pay the fee over again. I'd like you to waive that because.
It would be nice to know if we had any habitual issues, people having a permit that expires. I'm not sure if they've already expired. If they expire, they extend it for a year, it expires again. So one's on the counter, we'll give you that waiver, but if it happens again, then there will be a waiver.
Yeah, yeah, we can tell them that, or they can come back the second time and we say, wasn't this guy back here a year ago? Guess what? You don't get your 2/3, pay your fee.
Yeah.
You know, and we should be able to track that, we should know, plan
Yeah.
all this sort of time.
Oh, yeah.
This is their first time, second time, so we would probably be part of the presentation.
Yeah,
It should be.
Does that answer all your questions, Larry, on that one?
Well,
I don't leave anything hanging out here tonight.
I think the only, most of us take care of the question of the first one, but, I think Mr. Mills made a motion to fee the original permit fee.
yeah.
I'll second that. Motion and a second, all in favor? Aye.
Brian, I'm not sure if you heard the discussion, we just made a motion to. Brian?
So I think that takes care of the first 3 items on there. The only thing, I put this back on the unfinished business, we had talked the last time about the sign ordinance. And, I think I gave you one, it's just, it's Article 1400, 120, at the top.
I think I have 1,400.
I did not give it to you, I have copies.
Yeah, I don't think I have.
No, I don't have it here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
What is that?
This is what we discussed last time.
Oh, yeah.
What I believe we discussed last time was to add a section in the sign ordinance, which is Article 1400. That's right now, regarding pole signs and medical cannabis.
On the whole sign at major intersection, I would add 100 foot if a certified professional engineer and/or certified professional surveyor.
Certified professional engineer, what?
and/or professional, certified professional surveyor. Professional engineer or certified professional surveyor. Certifies that the pole sign is located. I have looked at more signs driving down the highway after this. All right, so first sentence, pole signs shall be permitted to a maximum of 100 feet if a certified professional engineer or a certified professional surveyor certifies that the pole sign is located within 2,000 linear feet. Larry, we still need to define the intersection, correct? What a major intersection, that was the one outstanding issue.
That's, I know there's a discussion on major intersection. I know that a number of ideas were thrown out there, but I'm not sure I have a clear idea of what the subcommittee is considering to be a major intersection.
I'll give my thoughts first. My initial definition of a major intersection, either along 64 or 35, would be any road that intersects those two highways. So Poplar Fork 34 exit there off of 35, I was defining that as a major intersection. I don't have heartburn one way or the other if we want to define major intersection as it's got to intersect with a divided two-lane or a two-lane highway, four-lane highway. I guess where I was looking at on 34, saying that right, if that's the right one, I call it the Winfield exit. Future development along that corridor, are we going to be back in this similar situation if we don't define that as a major intersection?
Along 34?
Yeah, where 35 intersects 34 at Winfield.
You define major intersection in a certain distance, right? Because
It says 2,000 linear
2,000
feet.
feet, so you have that distance, and then obviously 35, that would hopefully be developed, so any of those pop out, would still be able to probably okay, because two intersections on 34, 35, right up here. Here. Okay, that would
So you and Commissioner Foster, go ahead, did you want to talk on this as
Yeah, he was talking, maybe, anywhere that you've got major thoroughfares that have two lanes of traffic in each direction. So through the valley there, 34 and 64, that would be,
35.
the 35 wouldn't, because it's only intersects 34, it's only a two-lane road, all the way to Montefiore. If they later develop it and widen it, might qualify, but currently, under that definition, it would not currently qualify. You would only
Right.
have
The intersection here, where 34 goes under 35, But the intersection of 35 and 64 does.
get it both at Scott Depot and at Things Valley.
Yeah.
I don't personally feel one way or the other, I guess looking at it from 35, 34 standpoint. Hopefully that corridor is short-sighted not to include that.
I think it is short-sighted more on the 35 side than really 34, because 35 is a major, will soon be a major U.S. highway. And if you see other corridors across the state, there are major commercial development all along those that don't necessarily use South Ridge, for example. It's not intersecting. Interstate. So I like how it reads. I guess the major intersection is what's throwing it off, right?
It is because that's what we plan calls. The rest of the side, what's a major intersection?
What happens if we strike a major? Intersection. Because it's still got to be, still,
Because then you're gonna open it up to basically any intersection, meaning where my road comes out and hits 35, you'd be able to put a 100-foot pole sign up there.
would zoning fix that? If you're not, if you're in an R1 zone, you couldn't have that. It's only going to be in commercial zone. C1, C2,
It's, but keep in mind, it only applies to hotels, motels,
restaurants,
restaurants, and
gas stations.
gas stations. So only those four classifications. So all of those would probably be in a C1 or C2.
All right, so take for instance, we go back to Jim's point, Hurricane Creek Road. We took out major Hurricane Creek Road, uses, assuming that they fall within the zoning
Yeah,
surrounding. That's my question. Well, it'd be interesting to know what the zoning is. Take her. I guess how far are we getting out of zoning?
yeah, so if you took out major, then somebody could come in and put a gas station there where Hurricane Creek intersects 35. And they would be able to put up. But if you didn't take out the word major,
We need to define.
since Hurricane Creek's only, what, 2 lanes right there, it would not be considered a major intersection.
You know,
Good. Go ahead, Larry. Sorry.
Scott Eagle, take off there and come down to, Rock Cookie Road. There, takes on Bishop School.
Yeah,
Depending on your definition, that could be a major intersection.
That's probably within 2,000 feet too, right?
It is, it would be within 2,000 feet
Of the actual major intersection, 35 and 64 though, right? It possibly could. I'm
but
not
it's
sure if it
within
is.
2,000 linear feet of it.
It would probably be within that, but if that intersection is qualified as a major intersection,
Then you got 2,000 more feet.
you got 2,000 feet within 2,000 feet. It's not overlaps.
What is the danger of rewriting this to be allowed within 2,000 feet of I-64, the intersection of I-64 and Route 35?
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Intersection of 64 and 34 and Is that,
The only thing with that was my comment on 35, potential future development back away from 64, right? As it comes back this direction, that's where you could have a gas station going there.
But I thought he was asking, isn't what he was asking, wouldn't that cover it? Because if it
Only
says
be
any intersection within 2,000 linear feet,
of those crosses, so 64
64
and
and
35,
35.
64 and 34. So that would only capture that area, basically around 60.
I'm happy to throw in 30, 35. But I agree with David too, because if you work down to Mason Drive, there is a lot of untapped area that hopefully but you get into the issues.
Y'all are lost. If you say within 2,000 feet of any intersection on 35, and that's going to cover all your roads to the rear. All your intersecting roads on 35 all the way to the river. Or I'm sorry, all the way to Mason County.
Because the way I would interpret it is 2,000 feet from this intersection, so here's 64, say that 2,000 feet
Right.
is right here. That's the only area where this is at. And the same thing up here.
Right.
Would be just within that section on 35, the way I see it, you have substantial commercial development on the South Ridge that could pop up here. And you should be allowed to assign there as long as it's considered commercial, C1, C2, being used for the gas station, hotel, or restaurant. To allow that type of signage to attract.
But if we did with 2,000 feet, you'd be able to put it here. You'd be able to put one here. You'd be able to put signs at 2,000 feet that intersection. You're just saying, yeah, you take out the word major, it's any intersection in 2,000 feet of that intersection.
We're talking the same thing.
Yes.
No. No, I'm wanting to let the guy who wants to put in a gas station or motel at Hurricane Creek put up a sign.
I'm more in favor of that as defining it as intersection. 2,000.
Yeah.
If it's Hurricane Creek Road, if it's Work
Yeah,
Road, if
yeah.
it's whatever.
Yeah.
I think that
I think
avoids.
it's pretty consistent with other corridors, not only.
So we would take out the word major. Right?
Yep.
The only other change I would recommend would be that last sentence. I would say, and I would, instead of saying applicable to, I would just say the pole sign shall only be allowed for restaurants.
Yeah.
Allowed for instead of applicable
If nothing else makes the agenda on the next meeting, Larry, I'd like this one on the agenda. Hopefully get this one to rest. Do you need a motion from us to make this change? Okay.
I will make a motion to remove a major intersection, replace it with an intersection. To add to Jason's earlier point, that first line between engineer and certified, or a certified professional surveyor. Third line, remove be applicable and add allowed for.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Brian?
Motion carries.
Last one was on that third line where it says applicable to restaurants, just allowed for.
So the next one is medical cannabis.
I got a couple suggested changes to that.
Please, because we were stumped on this one.
Well, it looks like we're just basically in the first paragraph requiring them to comply with state law. So I would recommend on the second line where it says must follow the language, I would change language to requirements. Must follow the requirements of the West Virginia State Code. And then I would,
This is a motion, correct?
then I would put a comma after state code and have it read as follows, including but not limited to the use of the term medical cannabis. Leave that, so instead where it says by using, I'd replace that with including but not limited to use of the term medical cannabis. The first one?
Yeah, it says it must follow language.
No, must follow the requirements of the West Virginia State Code. So change language to requirements. Got it? In the second one, we just got a tense disagreement here. On the third and last line, instead of being dispensaries, that needs to be dispensary. And then medical cannabis grow facility, medical cannabis processing facility, and medical cannabis laboratory is located. So just change all those plurals to singular. That's my motion.
I will second that motion for both of those.
Motion is second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Dodrell, anything you see standing out on the signage?
What's
Or
that?
anything you see on the second paragraph there for the signage that you think we should entertain changing? At the bottom.
Oh, that's what I did.
Okay, I got you, sorry.
Yeah.
Zoned out for a minute.
Yeah.
Larry, do you have anything else on the signage part for medical cannabis? Okay. Do we have anything outstanding under just the ordinance and regulation for dispensaries, grow facilities, processing, and laboratories? Okay. I think that gets us through all of that. That was on the unfinished business agenda. Any new business? I sent out an email, but I think that's probably resolved. Based on a copy of the plat I got today, it shows that plat and that cul-de-sac being gravelled on the approved plat. I guess my question is does our ordinance require in that type of situation for that to be paved? If so, I'd like to look at that.
The problem we're running into in the planning office is there are a total of 5 lots there. And Melissa can probably explain this to you, but I really can. There are 5 lots there, and there had to be development apparently on the 5th lot, which is the turnaround. If that is going to be sold, which I think there's discussion about that, it's going to be sold, I think the ordinance requires that turnaround area to be paid. They're going to have some covenants put in place as well, to take care of the expense of sharing the expenses of maintaining all that stuff. So I'm not sure exactly how to get around that one. Like I say, Melissa is probably available to talk about that. I know enough about it just to be able to.
Well, in the way I read it, though, I thought they were thinking about, just picture this with me if you can. If this is the road, they were talking about putting the cul-de-sac here, the turnaround here. I thought they were talking about going on through, putting the road on through to some other lots, which is why they were saying, look, why are you gonna make us put a cul-de-sac in here if we're gonna have it go on through? Is that something, am I misunderstanding that?
No, I think that is the real question.
Which makes sense to me. I mean, why make them put a cul-de-sac in if they're gonna, basically just putting a bubble in the road?
Yeah, there's no point in putting a cul-de-sac in if you're just gonna tear it out.
Yeah.
No, I mean, on the current plat, that entire back, I don't know how many acres that is, I don't see it here, bear with me.
That, we're talking about basically.
Yeah, so here's.
Wendy's up here? Oh, this is an old. If they're gonna develop this back here.
This is what's. And in the way it's shown on the plat, is that bulb to the bulb. Gravel, which I agree with that. Still, this is
Where's the lot they were talking about selling? Oh, man. Again, you don't need a cul-de-sac.
There was something, like I said, I don't remember what it was.
That's what she
I want to figure out.
said. Doesn't make any sense to me to pay a cul-de-sac. Go straight through it.
Oh. Want to promote business.
But that's
Having them
just-
go through extra expense.
That's just silly. Wife?
I'll read what I got. And this is a summary from Mr. Sims. So just as a background, we're moving along with the major subdivision plans in the second half of 2017, and plans have moved along through different approving authorities without a cul-de-sac shown on the plans. In late October, the cul-de-sac shows up on the plans. At that time, Tim Smith, who was the planning department head, discussed with me on the phone that there was a need for us to add the cul-de-sac, but since the plan was eventually to extend the roadway and develop the track 5, that we would not be required to pave it, but we could use a stone-based material that was suitable for cars to turn on. We currently have a purchase agreement in place with an individual who intends to start construction on a project as soon as the sale is final, which would include extending the paved roadway back into Track 5. If we are required to pave the cul-de-sac before we can sell the Track 5, and then the new owner just have to dig it up to extend the roadway, that doesn't make common sense.
I see their point, I mean, that's just silly. Put
Yes,
down
we're
asphalt
trying
and
to-
just take it right back up, and
I think you satisfy by putting stone base down, so.
move rock around.
I think,
right.
We've got a requirement in writing somewhere to make that, we need to change that requirement.
How do we go about changing that? Is that something the planning commission can change? Is that,
Yeah, I think it's something that's required of the current.
if there are more than 5 lots, there has to be a cul-de-sac?
Something along those lines, like I say, I'm not Melissa's probably a better source on that time.
They gonna subdivide that lot on down there, or is that gonna be like one house? I can see maybe later on, if they're gonna subdivide that, maybe put a cul-de-sac down, on down, but not one up here.
Mr. Simpson, he would be willing to enter an agreement that if the purchase does not exceed the payment of the purchase. I probably should say this, I think the hard lift for us, probably, is to start out there, to start getting some staff.
Tell people when I was working for a insurance company, in the coverage question. Yesterday, say, I think I found where we can deny coverage. Like, don't you come to me like that. Your first initial attitude needs to be, how can I find coverage? And if you come to me and you said, look, I've looked all through this policy, and I cannot find where there's coverage in this law. You've exhausted your efforts there, then apply. But don't come at me and say, I think I found where we can deny coverage. So the same thing here, these people ought to be looking for ways in the ordinance
Right.
they can get what the people need to have done without violating.
I'm happy to change anything we can.
And I can tell you one time we do, in the office, again, this is stuff that never got before the subcommittee or planning commission. But there have been a number of times that we have been able to, within the requirements of the ordinance, make things work.
Sure.
I mean, we do that on a regular basis, I can tell you.
That's the way it ought to be.
Yeah,
Should be.
We try.
And I think too, where I'd like to see, at least for this committee, is for staff to, that's something the ordinance committee should take up. If it doesn't pass, if this is an ordinance requirement, I'd like to see Melissa or whoever, but to send an email out to whoever who's chairing this committee, and say, hey, this came across my desk today, this doesn't seem to make sense. You guys look at this. That's how the ordinance is.
How can we make this work?
How do we make it work? I don't have any other new business. You gentlemen do. I'm happy to entertain. I'm also happy to take a motion.
We adjourn.
Second. So moved. See you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Larry.